Hello and welcome to the Poetry Exchange. I'm Michael Schaefer and it's just me today. Sadly, there's no Fiona, she couldn't be with us, so you'll just have to make do with me, I'm afraid. Before we go into this month's episode, I did just want to say a massive thank you to the Norfolk and Norwich Festival and the National Centre for Writing in Norwich for hosting us at the Norfolk and Norwich Festival last Saturday, the 26th of May, where we were in a Spiegel tent, most beautiful venue, and we shared some sections from our book, the Poetry Exchange Anthology, Poems as Friends. And I was really lucky to have some incredible people with me. Roy McFarlane, who many regular listeners will know, and Hannah Jane Walker, who we met at Latitude Festival some years ago. She joined us and shared a poem that had been a friend to her, and indeed she is in the anthology. And we had the most wonderful time sharing some sections of the book with a really wonderful audience who asked some brilliant questions and bought the book and came and got the book signed afterwards, and we just had the most wonderful time. So thank you to everybody there. Now, we've been lucky enough in recent months to be able to share with you some conversations that we've had with some incredible poets. And this month is no different. We were fortunate enough to speak to Nick Laird, the most incredible poet. His last collection, Feel Free, published by Faber and Faber, was shortlisted for the 2018 T.S. Eliot Prize. And in fact, Fiona bought it for me. Thank you, Fee. And that's incredible. And he has a new collection coming out. And I'll tell you about that perhaps after we've heard the conversation. So you'll be hearing myself and Fiona talking about The Envoy of Mr. Cogito by Zbigniew Herbert and translated by Bogdana Carpenter, the poem that's been a friend to Nick.
And we usually start by asking our visitor, our guest, to give the poem a reading.
Sure.
Would you do that for us, Nick?
I will, of course, yeah. Go where those others went to the dark boundary for the golden fleece of nothingness, your last prize. Go upright among those who are on their knees, among those with their backs turned and those toppled in the dust. You were saved not in order to live. You have little time. You must give testimony. Be courageous when the mind deceives you. Be courageous. In the final account, only this is important. And let your helpless anger be like the sea. Whenever you hear the voice of the insulted and beaten, let your sister scorn not leave you, for the informers, executioners, cowards, they will win. They will go to your funeral and with relief will throw a lump of earth. The wood borer will write your smoothed over biography. And do not forgive. Truly it is not in your power to forgive in the name of those betrayed at dawn. Beware, however, of unnecessary pride. Keep looking at your clown's face in the mirror. Repeat, I was called. Went there better ones than I? Beware of dryness of heart. Love the morning spring, the bird with an unknown name, the winter oak. Light on a wall, the splendour of the sky. They don't need your warm breath. They are there to say, no one will console you. Be vigilant. When the light on the mountains gives the sign, arise and go. As long as blood turns in the breast, your dark star. Repeat old incantations of humanity, fables and legends, because this is how you will attain the good you will not attain. Repeat great words, repeat them stubbornly like those crossing the desert who perished in the sand. And they will reward you with what they have at hand, with the whip of laughter, with murder on a garbage heap. Go, because only in this way will you be admitted to the company of cold skulls, to the company of your ancestors, Gilgamesh, Hector, Roland, the defenders of the kingdom without limit and the city of ashes. Be faithful, go.
Thank you. It's really quite a read.
It's a very strange poem, and I'm sort of surprised to find myself picking it, I have to say.
That was going to be my first question.
I imagine that you have fairly close to the forefront of your mind an enormous store of poems. And when this invitation came in to bring along a poem that's been a friend to you, I'd be really interested to know the sort of process that you went through to arrive at this one.
So about 20 years ago, for an anthology called Lifelines, you had to pick a favourite poem, and this was the poem I've chosen. It's been with me for a long time. Normally the kind of poems I like are, Auden and Larkin and Heaney, and lots of poems that maybe use things like rhyme and metre and stanza. And this poem doesn't do any of that. It deals with these big abstractions like courage and anger, but it also has a kind of slyness about it. It's got a bit of wit. And something in me clicks when I hear those lines 7 and 8. Be courageous when the mind deceives you. Be courageous in the final account. Only this is important. There are bits of it that I hear myself responding to. I think growing up in Northern Ireland, do not forgive. Truly it is not in your power to forgive in the name of those betrayed at dawn. I went to Poland when I was a lawyer for a year to work. And one of the reasons I went there was to learn Polish. I tried to learn Polish because I loved the Polish poets so much. So I've gone back a long way with Zbigniew Herbert, and this seems to be one of his greatest poems. It's from a book called Pan Cogito, which is Mr. Cogito, and it's the last poem in the book. He fought when he was a teenager for the Polish resistance against the Nazis and then lived under communism, and I suppose it's about dealing with the 20th century. I realised when I was reading through it just before this conversation, the people he mentions, Gilgamesh, Hector, Roland, those are not people from history exactly. It's not Alexander the Great. It's not Tutankhamun. He's not saying, admire these great heroes of history. He's saying, admire these heroes of literature. All of these people come out of poems. Gilgamesh is the Sumerian epic. Hector is obviously from the Iliad. Roland is from the French song cycle, The Matter of France. So the poem is also about the importance of literature in that way. It's about the fidelity has to be applied to writing, that there is a point in it that is inspiring in some way, that the reason we know these names are through literature, not through history.
It's really beautiful that you've picked up about the defenders of the kingdom without limit. They are the heroes of poetry, or they're heroes within poetry. Then that line that comes after also really fills your heart, doesn't it? And your head, of course.
Yeah. So the kingdom without limit is not a physical kingdom, just as obviously the kingdom of ourselves, but also the city of ashes. Hector is slain. So it's about the kind of pointlessness as well as the point, that you can't beat this thing. And I suppose in 1974 in Poland, censors at work, so Zbigniew Herbert was constantly being kind of harassed by censorship and had to find ways of talking about his own situation, sometimes through classical references, sometimes through holding everything at a slight distance. And so it seems to be a poem responding to a place and a time. Growing up in Northern Ireland, I do think that one of the reasons that so many Northern Irish poets are attracted to Polish poetry is because it does deal with, I don't want to say political writing, but it does deal with some of the things that you're encountering in the North. So I think when I came upon this poem, I sort of fell on it. And it seemed to me to have more in common with some of the situations we were dealing with than, say, poetry from England at the time.
It's almost like advice, this poem. It reminded me a bit of Polonius's advice to Laertes in Hamlet, where the father is telling the son how to live a good life in a way.
To thine own self be true.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. It's sort of got a bit of that to it, hasn't it? There's an instructional element or an urging to us to kind of live our lives in a certain way. And then he lands on be faithful, go, just 3 very simple, all of that just sort of gets distilled down into that. It's extraordinary.
So I think the reader at the end of this collection becomes the envoy of Mr. Cogito, and this is advice from Mr. Cogito to the reader. So all of these verbal imperatives, go upright, be courageous, let your sister scorn not leave you, beware of unnecessary pride. I almost feel like I should apologise for the poem because it seems ridiculous to have a poem where someone is saying this is how this is how you have to behave in the world. Like, it seems insane, and yet somehow he gets away with it. It's not just the golden fleece; it's the golden fleece of nothingness. Do you know, he's saying, like, there's no point to any of this, but hell, let's do it anyway. It has a kind of earned, lived quality about it, like much Polish poetry, in fact, and you can feel it somehow in the work. And that's often the way with Herbert or Miłosz or Wisława Szymborska, or any of those Polish poets. They know what they're talking about.
The lived experience that's behind it is so palpable, isn't it? And the almost the extreme of kind of paradox that is thrown at you could only be found by somebody who really knows what it is to be faithful to faith, to the faith of writing truth in time of tyranny and oppression and violent suppression. Only somebody who's gone through that could have this kind of lightness of touch. There are these kind of tiny light moments, aren't there?
Yeah. I hear like the Soviet censor when he talks about, they will go to your funeral and with relief will throw a lump of earth. The wood borer will write your smoothed over biography. So this sense of refusing to be put in your box in some way, refusing to let your biography be smoothed over. Yes, and then that wonderful turn, beware of dryness of heart. So don't be too dry about the thing. Also, let your senses speak to you. Love the morning spring, the bird with an unknown name, the winter oak, light on a wall. The Italians have that wonderful phrase, l'occhio vuole la sua parte, the eye deserves its part, or the eye wants its part. And there seems to me some of that in this as well. Like, you also have to be allowed to live. Like, everything cannot be political in some way. You have to be allowed to have a private life where you can have private feelings and emotions.
Just whilst you're on that moment there, Nick, light on a wall, the splendour of the sky, would you just, these next couple of lines, just talk to me about those? They don't need your warm breath. They are there to say, no one will console you.
It's a wee shimmy again, isn't it? It's a wee twist. He's saying, look at all these wonderful things, but they don't need you. Like, they're there forever, and they're there to tell you that no one will console you. Nothing's going to help you here. So he's constantly moving back and forwards. He's saying, like, go for the golden fleece. The golden fleece is nothing. Look at all these wonderful things. These things won't help you. You know, repeat these great words, repeat them stubbornly. This is how you'll attain the good you will not attain. So it's this same thing. I can't go on, I'll go on. That's the Beckett quote occurs to me when I read it. It knows the pointlessness, and yet it sees the point. So this sort of tragic paradox of what it is to know that nothing you do is any use, has any help, and yet the importance of always doing something.
It's almost like the myth of Sisyphus. It's the heroism of that in a way.
So it insists on effort, and that to me is sort of admirable in some way. So that, again, it seems to me an ethical choice. So it's a poem that I think does try and come up with a solution to these kind of intractable, insoluble problems of living under a tyranny, of living in a place where you couldn't tell the truth, of living in a place where your whole purpose was compromised.
My mind's completely blown by this, Nick, and by your insight into it and the way you've revealed this. It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
So even whenever you get to a simile, like, and let your helpless anger be like the sea, like, the reader thinks, well, what does that mean? Like, does it mean be like the sea, all encompassing? Does it mean that it can go forward and drown things? Does it mean that we can float on it? And it's left open in that way. So it seems to me almost that he's refusing to tell us at that point. There's little bits of that where he refuses to tell us exactly what to think. Let your helpless anger be like the sea whenever you hear the voice of the insulted and beaten. Does it just sit there, the sea? What is the... And it's not clear to me. So these open similes, it does something to me. I just think he's managing to get it all there.
In what moments do you find yourself either reaching for the book or bringing some of those lines and images to mind?
I do think of those lines, be courageous when the mind deceives you, be courageous. In the final account, only this is important. And it's very easy to let the mind deceive you. So I do think of those lines. Be faithful, go, I think of as well.
I can't help when I see arise and go, just those three words together, I can't help but think of Yeats.
Of course, yeah. It's from the Bible, there before Yeats, isn't it?
Oh, is it?
Yeah, yeah. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree and the small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. But I think it's from, I can't remember the biblical reference, but it is from something. I will arise and go.
That's one of my favourites.
Yeah, but you see how easily you can remember the Yeats?
Yes,
Like
exactly.
you couldn't quote this poem.
I don't know. I might now be going arise and go as long as blood turns in the breast your dark star.
It's lovely, isn't it? Hard to find a new way of talking about the heart.
Mm.
And that does it.
Yeah, just hanging on in that. It's a new way. Why else does he say that? As long as blood turns in the breast, your dark star.
I think it's the heart. The heart is described as the dark star. So it's be vigilant when the light on the mountain gives the sign. Arise and go as long as blood turns in the breast, your dark star, as long as you're alive. But the fact that he goes on and says they will reward you with what they have at hand, with the whip of laughter, with murder on a garbage heap. So constantly this up and down, this advice to go and do this for no reason at all. This tragic paradox. I think there's something in it that it's really interesting to me. It refuses to give easy comfort. It refuses to say there is a point to this, and yet at the same point, this is a long poem saying you must do this. But he doesn't say, there's a worth to it, there's a point to it. Mm-mm.
You've mentioned the courageous lines, and I'm just very aware of those two little but very big lines that come immediately before that. You were saved not in order to live. You have little time. You must give testimony.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of poetry as testimony is a sort of complicated idea for me. I think I'm resistant to it as an idea. I think the poem has to be allowed freedom and joy and delight in its own circumstances. And I don't want to think of poetry either as therapy or testimony. And yet, it has to be testimony in some regard, particularly when someone like Herbert is living under the strictures of, communist Poland. But again, this weird paradox: you were saved not in order to live. Well, he has to have been saved in order to live in some way. So even whenever he's saying that, you have little time, you must give testimony. This urgency is also being undercut in some way. I have a kind of resistance to the word testimony, but I think this poem, again, in the same way that it does with so many things, it kind of gives it a different sense. The testimony has to be freighted with ambiguity in the way that he insists all the way through. There is this paradox in it. You give testimony, but it's pointless. His poem won't change the world. Obviously Auden's line, poetry makes nothing happen. True in some regard, and in another regard not true at all, because poetry's brought us here today and makes lots of things happen. But when it comes to Herbert giving testimony, it didn't bring down about the fall of communism or anything else. But this is also a guy who was in the resistance. He knew that direct action was needed at times and did that too.
For all the imperatives and for all the commands, it's asking something of you, isn't it?
I think it's interesting when you've grown up in Northern Ireland. I keep repeating that, but and say you've lost people in the Troubles, and I've friends who died in bombs or whatever. And then whenever I get to lines like, "And do not forgive, truly it is not in your power to forgive in the name of those betrayed at dawn," I think I get that. I feel that it's not up to me to say everything's fine. So there are bits of it that seem to speak directly to me and make an ethical choice, and there are other bits that don't, that leave it open. There seems to be always, I find in Herbert, a kind of incessant confrontation, and I feel that's really rare in a poet. Herbert is thrawn, we would say in Northern Ireland, like he's stubborn, he's itchy, he's always going back to poke the wound in some way, and that is incredibly exciting and thrilling to come across when you're a reader. He wants to try and fix the thing. He wants to see all sides of it. He wants to understand what's going on. So this incessant confrontation, I find it in this poem. Like he's trying to work out what to do, how to be, how to live. But yeah, it's not an easy poem to talk about, as we're finding.
It's not an easy poem to meet in one go. And I'm really grateful to you for choosing it for that reason, because that relates to our thing of the idea of poems as friends, because friends are the people that true friends are the ones that you have to sit with many times and will sit with you many times. So
in that idea of like poems as a friend, I'm not sure this is a poem you'd want to go for a pint with.
it may not be that, although I don't know.
You might ring it up if you had to bury a body, you might bring this poem up.
The Envoy of Mr. Cogito by Zbigniew Herbert. Go where those others went, to the dark boundary, for the golden fleece of nothingness, your last prize. Go upright among those who are on their knees, among those with their backs turned and those toppled in the dust. You were saved not in order to live. You have little time. You must give testimony. Be courageous when the mind deceives you. Be courageous. In the final account, only this is important. And let your helpless anger be like the sea whenever you hear the voice of the insulted and beaten. Let your sister scorn not leave you. For the informers, executioners, cowards, they will win. They will go to your funeral and with relief will throw a lump of earth. The wood borer will write your smoothed over biography. And do not forgive. Truly, it is not in your power to forgive in the name of those betrayed at dawn. Beware, however, of unnecessary pride. Keep looking at your clown's face in the mirror. Repeat, I was called. Weren't there better ones than I? Beware of dryness of heart. Love the morning spring, the bird with an unknown name, the winter oak, light on a wall, the splendour of the sky. They don't need your warm breath. They are there to say, no one will console you. Be vigilant. When the light on the mountains gives the sign, arise and go, as long as blood turns in the breast, your dark star. Repeat old incantations of humanity, fables and legends, because this is how you will attain the good you will not attain. Repeat great words. Repeat them stubbornly, like those crossing the desert who perished in the sand, and they will reward you with what they have at hand, with the whip of laughter, with murder on a garbage heap. Go, because only in this way will you be admitted to the company of cold skulls, to the company of your ancestors, Gilgamesh, Hector, Roland, the defenders of the kingdom without limit and the city of ashes. Be faithful. Go.
That was Fiona with the gift reading at the end there. And our thanks, of course, to Nick for finding the time to talk to us and for allowing us to share that incredible poem and conversation with us. Our thanks also to Oxford University Press for allowing us to share the poem with you. I felt very grateful to be able to get a way into that poem. It's one of those that I'd never come across before. If I'm honest, I'd not come across Zbigniew Herbert before. And it's an example where being introduced to a poem through somebody else's passion for it has really kind of opened it up to me and really allowed me a way in. I hope that's been the same for you. I thought it was extraordinary, this really powerful poem about the importance of literature, this idea of doing the right thing, kind of complicated, difficult poem that doesn't shy away from difficulty. It doesn't give us any kind of easy answers. And there were certain moments that I couldn't help but relate to some of the things that we're witnessing coming out of the Middle East. So, thank you, Nick. I mentioned at the beginning that Nick has a new collection coming out. It is called Up Late, and it's released on the 6th of June in the UK, and it's published by Faber and Faber. And Nick was kind enough to read a poem from that collection. This is called The Outing.
The magpie reasserts its stance with a testy flap of black on white, a flash of blue. And a stone might do, but doesn't, so I have to shoo it off with a folded tartan picnic blanket. And the baby rabbit, what is left of it, keeps screaming. And it happens that your options narrow, sometimes drastically, and what you might do if the kids were not here is walk to the car and get in it and leave, turning up the radio. But they want to know now what one does with enormous pain when you see it, where you should put it, how might you stop it, and they're watching, and the rabbit is done, past saving. So I lift the stone again, and the bird hops off as I walk across, and looks on with interest. And if at first I miss it, the second time smashes in the socket of the rabbit's eye, the one the magpie's already emptied out to a plush red nest, a divot of flesh. I'm in the driver's seat and breathing and need to drink some water. I can overhear it screaming in the silence that fills the car on the drive back to a house that is a little different, harder, sharper, and where my children will not look at me.
That's about all we've got time for this month. We'll be back with you next month with more Poems as Friends. Until then, thank you for listening.